We will go to Senator Cadell.
My concern is the consistency of a bill as important on freedom of speech and freedom of expression must be clear, must be concise and must be absolute. Today we've heard Senator Canavan raise what is said in the bill about electoral process versus what's said in the memorandum about voting or misinformation for candidates. Today we've heard Professor Twomey and the Bar Association point out what the bill says about opinions aren't counted, but in the memorandum it says explicitly in the memorandum that information is intended to include opinions, claims, commentary and invective on page 37. On the EM on suppression, you say nothing will be downranked or nothing will be cut off on a site, yet on page 100 of the EM, for example, they could be, this is talking about platforms, digital communication platform providers could be required to use automated processes and technology to detect and act appropriately on misinformation and disinformation under a misinformation code or misinformation standard. For example, they could be required to use technology or algorithms to downrank or reduce the spread of misinformation or disinformation, or to nudge a person to reflect on it before sharing. So there is a disconnect between the clarity you come here and say what the bill does and what the EM says it will do, in those three respects, if not more. So you sit here and we say we haven't made any judgments what is misinformation, but you could clearly say, not 15 minutes ago, that a discussion around interest rates would not fall foul of the economy side of things. So either you've looked at what is misinformation or you haven't looked at it and what is meant to be affected. What have we done here?
So, Senator, please, do you mind just actually clarifying that
15 minutes ago you sat here and said you didn't think that the discussion around interest rates and what's going on would fall under the forms of this. It goes on. So how have you considered that if you haven't considered what is misinformation? If we're now going to consider this, why do we know that now? How can the department speak with clarity on what might and might not be considered?
Because, again, Senator, it comes back to both what is in both the bill and the explanatory memoranda about the clear definition of what mis and disinformation is. Both the nature of mis and disinformation as two different types of content, and then the nature of serious harm and the consequences that it would have as mis and disinformation. So again, like, we could talk about lots of different hypothetical examples, but they still have to have that characteristic of being verifiably false and misleading, with the effect of causing significant harm and far-reaching consequences. So debates about interest rates don't fall into that category. Making claims about a candidate wouldn't fall into that character.
In your EM it does.
But the EM references the fact that the claims were false and misleading. The EM references the fact that the claims were based on the material referred to, defined as mis and disinformation about a candidate, rather than legitimate debate about a candidate. So again, I think it comes back again to that important limitation that the bill provides on what mis and disinformation is.
Would you consider significant stakeholder engagement on this bill?
We've had very extensive stakeholder engagement on this
bill. How
bill.
is it to this point of the day, not one witness who isn't a government agency, and only today only one witness who is a government agency, says this bill should pass as it is? Not one person. We've had lawyers, we've had interest groups, we've had religious groups, we've had media groups. Not one of the interested stakeholders has said this bill should pass as it is.
I don't know that that's true.
Name one other than Anima today.
There have been many who've said that there's elements of the bill that
elements
they
of the bill
support, and there's
as
elements
presented.
that they would like to see
Chair,
amendments to.
Name one that said it should pass as presented.
Okay.
So, Senator, what we have done is referenced the significant concern that is there in the community, not just in Australia but around the world, about the rise of mis and disinformation on digital platforms, which is also part of a broader context that we've discussed here in other hearings about an online environment where information that is false and misleading or unsafe can have very significant and far-reaching consequences for safety and well-being of individuals or communities. And the bill deals with that by getting a balance between allowing legitimate debate, even allowing for claims to be made that are not correct. So information can be posted that's just not correct, but it still has to have that very narrow definition met of verifiably false and misleading with significant and far-reaching consequences. So, again, we're responding to the concern that the community has expressed about what is perceived as a rapidly growing environment of mis and disinformation online. We've limited it to a series of types of serious harm in the bill. And again, coming back to the regime itself, and I think a lot of this, going to your point, does misunderstand what the bill actually does. It is again not about the regulator dealing with individual content online.
I've never said anything like that. I merely asked how you've come to a decision on this and this, on that.
Well, the bill reflects government policy.
Okay. I accept that.
Yeah.
So we have what I see is a misstep between what the bill says and what the EM says in a number of areas. We've gone there. You've mentioned, Ms Chapman, about this is about meeting codes or making codes up to spec when they are not. Which big tech companies' codes are not up to spec or aren't following them at the moment? Aren't being followed?
Well, Senator, as we've said in response to our reports, we've been doing annual reports after the signatories to the code, which the voluntary code, which, as you're aware, are not all major digital platforms in Australia. As we have said, we feel that there is a distinct lack of data and information about exactly what the platforms are doing in response to the code. It's inconsistent data. There's a lack of Australian-specific data. There's a number of areas that they are not responding to. So at this point in time, I think it's extremely difficult for the ACMA to make an evidence-based comment about the actual activities of digital platforms in Australia in relation to mis and disinformation. And I should say that's why the first part of the bill is aimed directly at the transparency requirements and our ability to collect more information.
At the point in time, you can't tell me one digital platform you think is not compliant with their own voluntary organisation.
You're talking about the digital...
the question whether that's the responsibility of Ms Chapman at the moment.
No, that's not the question.
Our responsibility at this point in time is to assess those transparent adversary reports, and I would say that they are inadequate at this point in time.
Why would the Australian Human Rights Commission, come out against this bill for its lack of balance in restricting freedom of expression? Why are we rushing to fix a problem you don't know exists? You've just told me this is about making sure these bills are up to spec and they're running with their within their guidelines and up to their responsibilities. You've just told me that you don't know any are in breach of them. Why aren't we doing the first part and getting that clarity first before running to fix a problem that you can't articulate and putting every stakeholder we've had who's not a government department who doesn't think this bill? Where is the win in this?
Senator, we have asked for further transparency to assess that issue. It's a government decision about policy, about how where it takes that. I should say, and there's been reference to this already, that there's considerable research that has been released about community concern about levels of mis and disinformation in the community. But at this point in time, the ACMA is not in a position to give an evidence-based, sound answer as to whether the code is or is not being fully complied with.
And Senator, if I could just add to that, I think it would be a summary of the policy that the government does not believe that the voluntary code process is adequate to deal with mis and disinformation online, that it does need to be mandatory. It is the experience in regulation, economic regulation, that mandatory codes are a better way of ensuring compliance rather than relying on industry alone. And you've seen examples of how, in relation to the current voluntary process, because you're depending on voluntary participation, there are varying levels of compliance with those different types of requirements, that there is no way for the regulator to ensure that those obligations are being met. And the government's view, as expressed in the bill, is that a mandatory code process is a better way of safeguarding the online environment against mis and disinformation.
So, from that point, every digital platform that operates in Australia must now have a regulated mandatory code.
Should the legislation be agreed to by the Parliament, there is a process in the bill whereby the platforms can submit.
They should.
Well, ACMA can also ask for a code, but if we agree that, if we consider that the information or the efforts made by platforms to try and deal with mis and disinformation is an important step in the right direction to deal with mis and disinformation, then a reform that provides a mandatory backstop for that to safeguard the online environment is a positive step in the right direction.
Thank you, Chair.